This episode of the Counselling Tutor Podcast is sponsored by webhealer.net. Webhealer are the go-to provider of websites for private practitioners in the UK. Established for over 20 years, Webhealer offers a non-technical and fully supported service to help therapists grow their private practice. Just one customer from your website each year pays for their services. Go to webhealer.net and use coupon code CT100 for their £100 off their Do It For Me service.
Welcome to the Counselling Tutor Podcast, the must-listen-to podcast for students of counselling and psychotherapy. Here are your hosts, Rory Lees-Oakes and Ken Kelly.
Hi, I'm Rory, and with me, as always, is Ken. How are you doing, Ken?
Exceptionally well, Rory. Thank you so much for asking. I'm really grateful to be here. It's episode 236 of the Counselling Tutor Podcast. We are so grateful that you've tuned in and joined us for this episode. 3 sections today, starting off with theory and practice, where we look at how hard theory presents itself in practice. Today, we're looking at the theory of conditions of worth. We then move on to practice partner, where we look at things that you might consider if starting up your own private practice, or if you're already in your own private practice, or even if you wish to just supplement your income by offering sessions in counselling or psychotherapy. And today is a follow-on from episode 235, where we started the discussion of business planning, what we might consider. So we're going to call it Business Planning 02. Number 2, Rory. Really creative thinking there from my side. And then we end today's episode with Practice Matters, where we look at an element of practice and what we may come across within our day-to-day running of a counselling or psychotherapy practice and who might come to see us. And Rory, today you interviewed an expert, that is Kel O'Neill, working with eating disorders.
Yeah, absolutely, Ken. This isn't the to be missed interview. Kel is she's a world-renowned, I would say world-renowned person on eating disorders, and she gives us some information that is truly startling, and that we need to hear. So, a plea from me: please stay to the end of this podcast. It's such an informative interview, and I think anybody in the world of counselling and psychotherapy who's, maybe working with people with eating disorders really needs to hear what she said.
Thank you, Rory. So let's start episode 236, as we do, with looking at how theory impacts in our practice. And the theory we're going to be looking and how that impacts in practice today is conditions of worth, Rory.
Yes, and as Ken alluded to in episode 235, we spoke about introjected values. So in this episode 236, we're talking of conditions of worth, and the two things go together. And conditions of worth is effectively how you're told what you're worth emotionally. And again, it really does speak to childhood experience. And Rogers, again, working in the Rochester Children's Home, Children's Society Prevention of Cruelty to Children, in his very, very first formalised practice, would have seen children who'd had, cared for children who'd had conditions of worth put on. They'd been told that they're, I don't want to be too triggering for people, worthless or useless or even worse. And people believe that because we believe what our caregivers tell us. And I think that is something that comes up in the therapy room a lot. And here's the thing, Ken, it's not just, childhood experience. I've worked with plenty of adults who've had very bad relationships with partners who have taken away conditions of worth. They've been told hundreds of things that aren't true about them. They've been abused and gaslighted. And as a therapist, you work with this diminished self of a person who believes that they are who they are because of what other people have said to them and told them they are. And part of a therapist's work is to help that person find out who they are And sometimes I think to call out those conditions of worth.
Yeah.
I know in my practice, Ken, I've had people who've said, "Oh, I've been called stupid," and I would say, "Well, you're not stupid." I would call that out, because I think part of the therapist's work is to role model and sometimes do some what's called respectful reparenting, where you're giving that, as Roger said, that soil of a different kind. You're helping to grow that person again in a more healthy way. And I think it comes down again to rebirth, to help them be reborn in the person they are, to shed off other people's views of them, and to see those views for what they are, and to find that love for self.
Yeah, I like it. Conditions of worth is an interesting one for me. So as a base theory, you've already described what that looks like, Rory, beautifully. It's kind of when we value, or society values somebody's worth based on something external, and it's easy to see if you watch a running race, then the person who comes first is maybe valued more than the other runners because they won that race. There is a condition of worth, and which is reinforced by culture and society, because that person will stand a little bit higher on the podium than the person who came second and third. They will get a gold medal that says you're a little bit better than the person who came second, who gets a silver one. And my goodness, Rory, if you come third, you get a bronze one. And it's just the culture. Our culture reinforces this kind of system of placing one person or valuing them above somebody else. And it's when that is taken on by an individual, by a client that we might see, and that they believe that, and that they see their world from that position. And it can be either side. So you spoke about a client who may come in and consider themselves stupid. And how can that happen? Well, they may get that message through their childhood. They may get it from their siblings. They may get it through their friends, and they take that on. And there is a condition of worth less than somebody else. I wish that I could spell like you. Maybe they have dyslexia. I wish I could spell. I wish I could construct sentences like you. I see you as being a little bit further ahead than I am, maybe worth more than I am. You get the praise from the teacher. But there's, of course, the other side of that, and that is maybe somebody who is a high achiever, maybe someone who is told, wow, you are academic, you have an academic mind. Maybe they get A's in their assignments. Maybe they get prizes at prize giving. They get to go up on stage. Maybe the teachers go, wow, you're a really hard worker. You're top of the class. Maybe their parents say, I'm so proud of you. You're doing so well in your academics. And this person might take that condition of worth. I am worth more when I am excelling, when I'm ahead of everybody else. That's when I get this praise. That's when I get all of the people crowding around me telling me that I'm okay, that I'm worth more. And of course, we all go through life, and eventually we're going to hit life parts that we maybe don't excel at, maybe that we can fail at. And a person that works from a condition of worth of I always excel, I always win, when they hit something that they can't get through, that may be absolutely devastating for them. That condition of worth is shattered in front of their own eyes. I don't know why this is. I'm not like this. I'm a winner. I get through these things. I don't have depression. I don't, you might see that kind of a presentation. This is not who I am. I'm not like this, would indicate maybe there is a condition of worth that underlies there.
Yeah, absolutely, Ken. And I think I make a distinction between he talks about people who are doing running. I mean, I'd say anybody who gets a bronze medal in the Olympics, he's going to be able to run a lot faster than I can, or ever could. And what a great achievement. And I think that people who do competitive sports understand the conditionality, that there's a first, second, and a third place. However, when we're looking at growing up as children, and I think you're hitting a really good point here, Ken. When you say to a child, you're really, really clever, what can happen? And it sounds like it's great, doesn't it? Oh, tell the kids you're clever, that's good. What can happen is they think, I'm really clever. And then when they find out they've got to struggle to do something, they may think, I don't know why I can't do this because I'm clever. And I think that we have to. I think it's about being realistic, and I always say to my grandchildren, and indeed my daughter, "You've done that. That's really good. So what's next? What are you going to do next? Where's your curiosity going to take you?" I think that's quite healthy. But I think in terms of therapy, we do meet clients who've been given very strong messages about who they are and their worth as a human being. This is what we're really talking about, their worth as a human being. And I have to say, I have worked with people who've been given messages that they're less than the dirt under someone's fingernail, to be quite brutal about it. And their self-esteem is so low. And part of the therapist work is to acknowledge that's how they feel, because that's their reality, but help them access a side of them where they do feel worthy and that they can develop themselves. And it's a mighty privileged position, I've got to say, Ken, to be that person that's holding someone in that state of, I don't know, dilapidation because of what other people have told them or done to them, and help them grow again. We're back to the soil of a different kind. It's like being a gentle gardener, helping that person flourish. And I guess the analogy is you could have a plant. Well, Roger's talked about it himself, didn't he? The potato, the malnourished potato in his potato bin only, didn't grow very well. And then he bought potatoes that had lots of light, supplements, water, and they grew. And he said everybody tries to grow, but their circumstances will hold it back. Part of therapy is to try to push back those introjected values and conditions, certainly the conditions of worth, help people see that they are a valuable human being, that they deserve to be here, they deserve their place in the universe. And mightily privileged work, and not easy with someone who believes they're less than.
Yeah, and not easy in a world that kind of reinforces worth all the time. When we're speaking about the Olympics, just getting into the Olympics, never mind standing on the podium is incredible. Getting into the qualifiers of the Olympics is incredible. It is the world that kind of, I guess it's where somebody might start living their life from that position of a condition of worth. But the manipulation is around us all the time. It's around us in certain societies. If you have a certain surname, you are considered that you would have be treated differently. If you wear certain clothes, you might be treated differently. Certain brands of clothes, you might be considered to be doing better than others. If you drove a certain kind of car, if you had a certain kind of job, if you wore a certain kind of watch, that you would be considered and seen as maybe. I'm just thinking now, Rory, you and I, this is a story maybe that shows how the world works on conditions of worth. Rory and I had a directors meeting where we went out of the UK and we went into Europe, to a country in Europe to do some thinking and brainstorming. And within this country, we were walking around and we were in our most casual of clothes, because we were kind of just taking it easy and thinking about what we might do in Counselling Tutor. And we were walking past the very high-end stores, and it was really interesting that they had security standing at the door, kind of gating who could come into the store.
Yes.
And it's very interesting. I think if you walked up in your Armani suit with your Rolex, that the door would be open and the carpet would be rolled down and the tea would be made as you were walking through the door. But I wonder, Rory, we were speaking about if we kind of walked up to the store, they wearing what we were wearing, they'd probably be pulling down the shutters.
With Tesco shorts and my Primark shirt. Yes, yeah. I thought I was high couture, to be honest with you, Kevin. It was very well dressed.
And the truth of the matter is, we're speaking about a person-centered theory here, and the person-centered theory, when we look at it, considers all of us as equal. There's no judgments, that we will see everybody as the human being that they are, that we as the therapist will strip away those conditions of worth and see only the person in front of us, so that we're not looking through a lens of worth. And of course, we see clients coming in, as you say, Rory, when you're kind of saying what this is really about, is it's about that person who is living their life from this condition of worth. This is being reinforced and taken on as a truth, and that can cause immense pain. And I think the way of working is patience, unconditional positive regard, love and acceptance for this human being who sits before us, because that strips it all away. That strips it all away, no matter what you're wearing, no matter what the brand, no matter what the job, no matter who you are. We are seeing each human being just as that human being, as that little spark that is in front of us.
Yes, I think it was the philosopher Hector who said, "I am human, and nothing human is alien to me."
Yeah.
And I think it's a wonderful observation of seeing someone as a human being, not connected with anything else, be that wealth or be that position. They're just another human being, and that's what I think therapists should do. And we've talked about turning up at the jewelers with my Armani top of my Primark top and my Tesco shorts. But there is another aspect to it. Some people do well and they become wealthy, but they have pain as well.
Yeah.
And sometimes, I think that it's easy to dismiss that and say, well, you're all right, you've got loads of money. But emotional pain, loss, bereavement, self-esteem, it transcends the kind of wealth and status, because it's a human condition. The clue is the word human. So I think we have to be thoughtful that human pain is universal, and conditions of worth, cut two ways. I've known people who've been lovely people who just happen to be quite wealthy, and they've come in for quite a lot of stick.
Yeah.
The blame of the world lands on their shoulders because they just happen to have done well in life. But I think from a therapeutic, we talk about theory and practice. You're absolutely right, Ken. It's meeting the client where they are, meeting them as a human being, and also helping them see who they really are. Because the theory would say, and there's not just person-centered theory, but a lot of other theories would say, that people know who they are. And that's what we call a phenomenological idea. There was a theorist called John Schleen, who was a student of Rogers, who said, everybody knows everything. There may be denials, cover-ups, lapses of memory, but we are the ultimate source. In other words, we know ultimately who we are. And with help, we can be who we want to be. And, I think that's the art of therapy. There's a lot of talk about science in therapy and research, but the art of the work lives in that reconstruction, regeneration of a person to be who they are, to live their lives by their own view of themselves, not others.
It's interesting. I'm glad that you put conditions of worth after introjected values, which you can listen to in our last episode. They do go hand in hand together. And we were speaking in the last episode about, it's sometimes the growth isn't about dropping stuff. It's about recognizing what is not real and shedding it off, smashing the truths that we hold and going, that's not my truth. That's what the advertising world has sold me, or what the messages that we get. It's when we value, I am worth more if, or I'm worth less if. There we're talking about condition of worth. In other words, the worth of that individual is conditional. And however that is kind of whatever the catalyst that started that in their life, it is the person who lives from that. I am worth more if I can't lose my job because I'm worth less, or I need to get that promotion because it'll mean I'm worth more. It's when you live your life from that I'm worth more if I'm worth less if perspective, where in reality that human being is worth the same no matter what, and we see them through the eyes of the same no matter what. That is that unconditional, listen to that, unconditional positive regard. So if you take conditions of worth, it's got the condition in it, conditional. It's conditional worth. And we're talking about unconditional positive regard. So it's kind of the antidote, the one cancelling out the other, which is great, a great way of being to present in that situation, Rory.
I like the word antidote. I really do. And I think when we think of the word antidote, we think of a medical term for giving something to somebody to cure an ailment or an illness. But I think that the necessary and sufficient conditions, certainly empathy, congruence, unconditional positive regard, as an antidote, are massively powerful for those people we meet who haven't been given that, who have been given messages that are destructive and toxic and have cut them down. And to come to a therapist and to help them explore and to grow and to reform, regenerate themselves is a wonderful thing. And that's where the work is. That's where, there's no doubt in my mind, there's no question in my mind, that's where the work is. It is about the patience, as you talked about, Ken. It's about sitting with that person and all their emotions and allowing them to reset themselves and start to grow again. And it's, I think, for both the client and the therapist, it's a commitment. It's a piece of work. And I think that's sometimes forgotten in therapy. Both people are working to create this. The therapist is working to create the environment, and the client is working to grow within that environment. And when it works, wow, it's incredible.
Yeah. And as always, as we kind of back out of theory and practice, we look at what can we do, and we recognize that when we speak about these theories, they apply to us just as much as they apply to our clients. And the work with us is really, it's that personal development. It's looking at ourselves. It's recognizing what are our conditions of worth. And I certainly can look back. I remember Rory moving into a home. We moved from Johannesburg to the Western Cape many, many years ago. And I moved into a rather large home in the Western Cape. And we didn't have much furniture to fill up this rather large home. So we had our outside garden table in our dining room because it was functional, Rory, and we would sit around. We would sit around on chairs at this outside table, but it was very weather worn, and the wood was peeling off and all of that kind of stuff. And I remember a neighbor from across the road coming in to welcome us to the area, and they came in and they brought a little casserole or whatever it was. And I remember the lady, when she walked into our home, she says, "Where's all your furniture?" And I responded by, "Oh, we've just moved from Johannesburg, so all of our furniture is not here yet." I felt a sense of shame that I was worth less because I didn't have what in somebody else's eyes was expected of me. And then, Rory, I set about compensating for that. What was my priority? It was to buy furniture. Why? So that I could settle that dis-ease within myself, so that I could be worthy of this big house that I just moved into. And I was acting from a condition of worth more if I surround myself with the right furniture. I look back now, we live a very minimalist lifestyle, and the more we strip off and we drop, the more of myself I find. It's that constant personal development, recognizing those conditions of worth within ourselves, how we act within our lives, the brands we buy. It's just a great topic, and I'm very grateful that you brought it, Rory.
Yes, and you're absolutely right. Conditions of worth. I guess in the 50s, Rogers was talking about childhood experience, but as we move into a more commercial age where we're pressurized, I call it the "you're worth it" generation. You buy this because you're worth it. I think it's all around us that you can't escape it. You defined sometimes people think or people define themselves by possessions and status, and actually it's about who you are. It's character that I think people remember more than the possessions you own.
Theory to Practice is proudly sponsored by CounselingSkillsAcademy.com. I'm Ken Kelly, and I've got a real burning passion for counselling skills. I've built training that takes the doubt out of using counselling skills. You get to see the counselling skills used in real live sessions by a qualified therapist. Full sessions, real material, real counselling skills. To find out more, go to CounselingSkillsAcademy.com. So moving now on to Practice Partner. Last week, in episode 235, we started the discussion on business planning, and today we look at business plan part 2, Rory. And what we're doing here is we're kind of demystifying the business plan. Business plans don't have to be a boring download a form from the internet and get kind of overwhelmed by it. It can be a fun, it can be a creative experience, because at the end of the day, you're thinking about you're thinking about your practice, you're thinking about the clients that you may want to see. You're just writing that down, and we have some more questions that you might consider when you're putting together your business plan. And I'd like to start off, Rory, with your working hours. And again, I think we touched on this last time, that your working hours are not just the sessions that you do. It is the administration of running your business. It is if you're traveling, it is the time to, and it is the time from, and the writing of the notes, the going for supervision, the time that you might need to spend responding to inquiries, replying to emails, replying to telephone inquiries, for example. So there's a lot to consider there, and it's worth writing that down and kind of thinking, what might that look like? Do you want to offer concessions or a sliding scale? So that would be about you and your valuing system. How might your fee structure look? And then would you offer various fees, and what might that look like? And you don't have to say, this is the price that I'm going to do that at. At the business stage session, you might go, that is something I do want to offer. I do want to offer a student rate. I do want to offer a concession rate for those that come to me. And then, and I think this is an important one, Rory, and I know I'm going to bat over to you when I kind of ask this question. Who are your clients? Who is it that you want to welcome into your counselling? Is it individuals only? Are you only going to see individuals? Have you trained in couples? Have you done any specialist training in children work, and you may look at children? Are you a supervisor? Do you invite supervisors? Who are these clients going to be, Rory?
I think that's a really good point. I think that, in our profession, certainly specialisation is becoming more the norm now. I see a lot of therapist websites that specialise in working with children, or working with couples, or working with trauma, or working with the LGBTQ plus community, or working with relationship issues. And I think that there's an expectation that if you offer that, you should be trained in it, or be competent in it. And it is sitting and wondering who your customers are, who you're going to aim your messaging at. And it struck me the other day that there's a kind of a wide range of people who will pay. And I myself and my wife went out for a nice lunch in Cheshire. We parked up in this. Cheshire is quite an affluent area near where I live in the north of England, for those maybe listening in the world. And we went and had a nice lunch. And I noticed there was hosts of expensive cars. I mean, there's Bentleys and Porsches and Ferraris and, And I thought, well, maybe if I was setting up a practice here, I may charge more because people are clearly more wealthy.
Yeah.
And that would be fine. And in fact, I have a colleague whose fees are in the hundreds of pounds an hour, and her clients are happy to pay that. That's the key thing. As they would be happy to buy a £100,000 sports car, they're happy to pay £100 an hour for therapy.
Yeah.
Where I live, the cars are somewhat older, and people would not want to couldn't afford to pay that. They may be able to pay £40 or £50 an hour. So it's really thinking about who you're going to serve and how many hours you've got to work to make money that will keep you to pay your bills. And one of the things that I found out the hard way, Ken, was that I set my fees up and I thought, this is great. So I've got my fees set up. Great. Clients were happy. I was happy. And it was only when I was driving back from my practice, I realized I was actually working for half price because I was charging a fee per hour, but it took me half an hour to get to my practice and half an hour to drive home. Now, that's fine if I had clients back to back, if I booked 6 clients. Therefore, that traveling time would be minimized by a factor of 6. But if I had one client, it effectively meant that I was working for half price. I'd spend an hour with the client, half an hour traveling, half an hour coming back. It was about 20 minutes, and then the time I'd used to fill my notes in. And you have to think about that because at the end of the week, you've got your working hours, the money you've earned, and you think, well, has those hours actually equated to the money I've earned? And if you think about it, if you work for someone, if you're an employer, you would be expected to be paid for the hours that you work. And if you're not careful, if you're self-employed, you can find yourself actually not being paid for the hours you work and huge chunks of time being taken up by doing other things. So I think it's worth considering, are you going to work a day and just see maybe 4 or 5 clients in a day, as opposed to stretching it across a week. All these things need to be taken into consideration because at the end of the week, on that Friday, when you come and you look at the money you've made and to pay your bills and to feed your family, you might think, well, I've worked all this week and I've only got this amount of money, So you need to be thoughtful of that, Ken, I think.
I think you're 100% right there. And you need to be thoughtful of that during your business planning time. And you writing this down now from a position of safety rather than this coming up as you're just kind of hoping this is going to go okay. You plan that, you look at what is the fee that you might need to charge and how many clients am I going to need to see to be able to make it through. And then there's further questions. What are your thoughts about offering maybe a free initial consultation? Would that work for you? Would you need to have a cancellation policy? What happens if you've made that travel or you've booked that time away and the person doesn't come? These are things, pop them in your business plan. I will offer a free 30-minute session to engage new clients. I will have a cancellation free. Put in all the service that you're going to offer. So if you have any specialisms, maybe hypnotherapy, mindfulness, coaching, whatever it may be, can you integrate them into your model? Are you going to be offering supervision? Will supervision fees differ from counseling fees? Lots to think about there. And then, of course, the $1 million question, where do you get your clients from? And you don't have to be specific. You don't have to be specific here, but have a think about it. Will it be for referrals? Will it be from, I don't know, maybe you'll do a day, a week, working at a medical center with the understanding that maybe when people are referring through that they were offered your paid service as well if they don't want to join the waiting list. What does that look like? Just an idea in your business plan. And of course, this is all balanced off about how much do you need to earn? So the business planning starts with you looking at your life, as you've already said, Rory, and going, you know what, I need so much to be able to get by. I'm going into this counselling business to supplement income. I'm going to do evenings only because I have a half-day job at X, and therefore I need to gain this much money from this practice. And it just gives you something to map back to. Being self-employed means there's no sick pay. You know, if you in full-time employment and you're off because you're ill, you generally getting paid for that. You need to look after your own insurances and national insurance payments sometimes. There's no holiday pay when you take a vacation. These are all things to take into consideration when you're working out how much you need to earn, because these are hidden in full-time employment. You don't think about them until they're not there and you're running your own business. And this is not to frighten you away. It's to give you a realistic view, a balanced view of looking at what private practice may look like. And it's always best to plan it. And it's planning takes away the surprises that may come.
Absolutely, Ken. And I think there's no better way to plan than talking to someone who's already in practice, or a number of people are already in practice. And the best way to do that, if you wanted to get a sense of what it's like to work in private practice, is to join our Facebook group. And if you go to Facebook, type in Counselling Tutor, it's all one word, knock on the door, we're a closed group, we'll let you in. And there's thousands and thousands of people in the world of counselling and psychotherapy. There's a lot of students, there's a lot of qualified colleagues who are in private practice, or maybe share their time between being self-employed and working for an agency. And just ask those questions, and I'll give you the answers. And I'll pick up on things like, planning for the times where you won't have any clients, Christmas, holiday seasons, and what do you do at Christmas? Well, in my first year as a private practitioner, effectively, come the end of November, that was it. Yep. It was just the phone didn't ring. Clients said they'd see me after Christmas. And that was it. And luckily enough, I'd done enough research to understand that was the case. And it was interesting because I worked at a practice where there was a CBT therapist that I spoke to, and there's a couple of other different forms of therapists. They offered different, more holistic approaches to things. And they all said that, come the end of November, it was quiet. And then come middle of January, the phone rang off the hook. So, you have to plan for that. And I think just, partnering up or talking to someone who's already in private practice gives you a really good indication. And it's going to vary from area to area. It may be in my area that was the case. It may be in another area it wasn't. And of course, there's the online piece, working online. If you work online, then a lot of your costs are going to be lower. So, you don't have to hire a room, but you do need to put your money into equipment and technology.
Yep.
So there's so much to think about. Setting up online isn't just a case of buying a computer and having the plant pot in the back. You need to make sure your internet connection's quick enough. You need to make sure your sound's quick enough, that your picture is appealing, that your clients can see you. And there's no distractions in the background, and it's reliable and it works every time. So there's so much to think about, Ken, isn't there? There is. That's why it's called business planning, I guess.
It is, yeah. And there's so much more to business planning. We're going to leave it there, but we could go on for a really long time. I'll share again that Counselling Tutor is in the process of building out a short course on going into private practice, and we'll share more details with you when that becomes available. But for today, we're going to leave it there with a practice partner, because we need to get on to practice matters, Rory. Why? Because practice does matter, doesn't it? And this is the section where we look at what we may come across in practice. I know a lot of you are hanging on for today's section, because Rory at the top of the podcast did say the importance of today's topic. It's Kel O'Neill, working with eating disorders, Rory.
Yes, and for those who have stuck with us, thank you so much, and you're not going to be disappointed. Kel O'Neill is very well known, certainly here in the UK, as a authority on eating disorders, and she's recently made a lecture for our counsellor CPD library, our paid CPD resource on working with eating disorders. But in this interview, she outlines what eating disorders are and some really, really interesting facts about what the impact of eating disorders. So I think without further ado, we'll go straight over to Kel and see what she has to say.
Practice matters.
The National Counselling Society is proud to sponsor Practice Matters. National Counselling Society are really excited to have launched their Children and Young People Therapist Register for counsellors working with the younger age group. To find out more, visit nationalcounselingsociety.org. nationalcounselingsociety.org.
And we welcome Kel O'Neill to the podcast, and especially excited because Kel has produced a lecture for us, Exploring Eating Disorders, a complex field requiring specialised training, and that will appear at some point in our CPD library. And I guess it brings me to my first question, Kel, which we were talking about just off air before we recorded. It is a specialist field, isn't it, eating disorders? It's not one to go into without any training.
No. And I guess we're in a difficult place in the field with that because the specialist training is pretty limited at this point. But the reality of working with eating disorders is the risk is exceptionally high. So we, at least in my mind, we have to have some additional knowledge in order to be practicing safely and therefore in order to be practicing ethically.
Yes, absolutely. And you were saying before we actually pressed the record button that there's some quite alarming statistics about the cohort of clients that we may see with eating disorders, certainly around suicide and just general medical conditions. Yeah,
so we know that specifically with anorexia nervosa, that has the highest mortality rate of all mental health conditions. And then eating disorders as an umbrella group does as well. And that's split between the medical risk and the risk of suicide. And even the risk of suicide is elevated in comparison to even maybe what we might consider terms that we would use in the acute severe mental illness bracket, like schizophrenia. Eating disorder suicide rates are significantly higher than those. And it's interesting to me how we found ourselves at this point in the field where I think most of us would consider, let's say, schizophrenia a specialised area of knowledge to have if you were going to work in it. And yet when we look at the practicalities of the risk, when it comes to eating disorders, we tend to see that as a little bit more of a grey area when it comes to managing the risk. But when you see the cold hard statistics, I think it clearly tells us where we should be sitting with this topic.
Yes, absolutely. And I mean, I guess there's two schools of thought. One is that once you qualify as a counsellor, you can work with anything. And the other school of thought, which I have to say I fall to more and more as the years have gone on, is that certain presentations need an awareness at the very least, and in some cases, a more specialist approach. Do you think that's a reasonable synopsis?
I suppose I sit somewhere on the fence in between the two of those, interestingly enough. So I absolutely believe that it's necessary in order to practice safely to have a pretty significant amount of knowledge of why eating disorders might present with high risk and what we can do about that and what additional considerations we need to take into our practice. The guidelines around eating disorders suggest that the appropriate course of action is multidisciplinary working, which certainly for those of us in private practice wouldn't be typical when it comes to counselling work. But at the same time, I'm not necessarily suggesting, me personally, I'm not suggesting that all counsellors need, if they want to work with clients with eating disorders, need to go and do a specific program in this is a treatment model for clients with eating disorders, because there are set treatment models that are considered the gold standard. But my experience has been that sometimes the therapist with the right skills is not the person that's using that, let's say, standardized treatment model. So I guess I'm saying that people need the knowledge to practice safely and to understand why eating disorders are complex. And then there's space there to apply the skills and the knowledge they've already got as therapists.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. Just hearing you kind of share your thinking on that. It strikes me that there is a wider debate within the therapeutic community. I'm going to name it as art versus science. The idea that traditionally therapy would have sat under the art. It was a creative, co-created relationship where there's more of an art view of it, if you like, as opposed to a scientific structured plan. And I think it's interesting where we sit as therapists between art and science. I know colleagues who are, who would be quite keen on treatment plans, but I think you're right. I think that the right therapist could provide the conditions to allow someone to explore why they are behaving towards food, or their relationship with food is as it is. It is interesting. But what I'm hearing is some awareness would be useful and essential for anyone who's thinking of working with eating disorders.
Yes, and I suppose that's largely around the risk component of it, and also some of the psychological process. So we know that thinking patterns in people with eating disorders are actually quite influenced, talking about the science, are quite influenced by the biological process that's also happening because of their relationship to food and how they're using that as a coping mechanism, and how our bodies might be altered by the way that we're eating and behaving with food impacts our thinking. So therefore there are some wall points where if you get up to this brick wall, you're just going to be banging your head against this brick wall if you don't understand the mechanisms of that. And that's often actually where counsellors do get stuck there. They get stuck with the fear of the risk because they don't know how to hold the appropriate boundaries for it, or they get stuck when they get to this wall and then typically come for some specialist supervision saying, what's going wrong?
Yes, and that kind of brings me to my next question, supervision. I think our supervisors should be able to provide the oversight and an overview of our practices as they are. So what's your view on someone who is working with eating disorders? Should they have a supervisor who is knowledgeable about that?
That's a good question, because my instinct to answer to that was to say yes. And I offer supervision, and 90% of the supervision that I offer is specialist, quote unquote, specialist supervision on an ad hoc basis. So for people who've got their regular supervision, but have found themselves maybe working with a client or some clients with eating disorders and want some additional knowledge base as part of their supervision, want some extra holding for that. But my supervisor doesn't specialise in eating disorders. And I suppose I feel comfortable with that because I know I've got the knowledge base. So I guess if you're doubting your knowledge base, you need the specialist supervision, versus if you've got a solid knowledge base, maybe there's more scope there for you to choose from a wider bank of supervisors, depending on what your needs are in your practice at that point in time.
Yes, and I think that's an interesting point you make, because I know that within my practice there are areas that I probably have more knowledge about than my supervisor. Can't expect your supervisor to be all knowledgeable, but I like what you say about reaching out for some secondary or some supportive supervision for a specific, maybe a specific client group. And I just wonder how many therapists would consider saying, my supervisor's good, but I just need a bit more from someone who knows a bit more. I wonder how many therapists would consider that would be quite the norm in practice.
I would say my experience would lead me to think that people don't realise it's an option until perhaps they see me or somebody in a similar working role to me talking about it, and then they realise, oh, my supervisor hasn't been giving me some of what I need in relation to this client or this collection of clients, and it's okay for me to go and do that. I think sometimes people maybe feel a bit almost like there's a loyalty to the supervisor when they can't say to the supervisor, you can't support me with this, I'm going to get it from somewhere else. But nobody can be all things to one person. So that seems like a sensible course of action to me. And it's actually one of my favourite things to do in my work as well, is to do that ad hoc supervision and know that I'm holding the counsellor or the therapist who's already probably got a good therapeutic relationship with a client, that if they referred to me, A, they'd be stuck on my waiting list, and B, I might not be personally a good fit for them. So to know that we can, as a team, hold that appropriate space, I think is great. But often I think counsellors do refer those clients on when it gets to that wall point instead of seeking the supervision.
Yeah, I think that's interesting, isn't it? From what I'm hearing there, is that specialist practitioners in this field may not be able to take clients on. So it may be that someone could take the clients on, but get some specialist and I like the phrase you've used, ad hoc. I like that ad hoc supervision to be able to maybe have some more formative information and also be supported while working with a client who may present with issues around eating. And I wonder, I don't know. I personally think it's a good thing to get as much professional view externally of your practices as you can. I've one final question as we kind of come to the end of this interview. Is the prevalence of eating disorders presenting in therapy, do you think, getting more? Is this something that is becoming a more prevalent presentation?
You're asking all the good questions today. So the statistics would say the answer to that question is yes. The statistics would, if I think about the sort of 15 years that I've been loitering around in the eating disorder field, we were talking about half of sort of 750,000 was what we were originally saying when I started working in the field. And now most of the charities say 1.25 million are affected. But the most recent NHS statistics, which were looking at symptoms rather than diagnosis, were suggesting monumentally more than that in terms of people struggling, but perhaps quite a little bit less severely than those people that rush to services, but who are seriously still struggling with eating disorders. And then on top of that research came out just before the pandemic. So on top of that, we've had the pandemic, which seems to, in everybody I've spoken to's experience, led to more people presenting for therapy and people getting sicker faster as well. And so I've never had a waiting list like this before. And I've never been in a situation that if I had a waiting list, there wasn't another therapist I could pass a client on to. But we're talking months and months and months and months of waiting lists now if you're looking for an eating disorder specialist. So whether counsellors like it or not, and whether a couple of years ago they might have said I'd pass those clients on to somebody, the reality is now, absolutely, counsellors are going to be seeing more people with eating disorders, because otherwise those people are going to be left with no support, sat on waiting lists for months and months on end. And I guess that's why it's become even more important to educate people who perhaps wouldn't want to ever consider themselves a specialist in eating disorders enough that they can hold space for some clients with eating disorders.
Well, I think that is a very poignant way to end this interview. Kel O'Neill's lecture, which will be in the CPD library, entitled Exploring Eating Disorders, a complex field requiring specialised training, will be available. I'm sure it'll be enlightening to those people who now will realise that eating disorders are more prevalent than perhaps we once thought. And it just remains for me to say, Kel O'Neill, thank you so much for joining us.
Massive thank you to Kel O'Neill for that really insightful talk. Thank you, Rory, for hosting that. And of course, if you want to hear more of what Kel has to say, there is an entire lecture, and you can get that in the Counsellor CPD library. And to find the Counsellor CPD library, go to counsellingtutor.com, and all the information is right there. If you're already a member of the Counsellor CPD library, just log in and that lecture is there and waiting for you. Rory, it has been episode 236 of the Counselling Tutor Podcast.
It has, and we started off with theory in practice, and we talked about conditions of worth, a very important part of Carl Rogers' theory, and a mightily important part of people's lives as we meet them in practice. And Ken and myself explored how that might present in the therapy room and also the wider context of conditions of worth. Then we went on to the practice partner session where we talked about business planning, our second part of business planning, and we talked about working out your hours, your fees, the practicalities of working for yourself, being a self-employed therapist. And finally, the much waited for interview with Kel O'Neill, talking about working with eating disorders, and a really good link to this fabulous lecture she's produced for the Counsellor CPD Library. And as always, stay grounded and stay safe.
If you're a qualified counsellor or psychotherapist, then why not check out the Counselor CPD Library? Stay current with your CPD requirements with over 150 hours of academically rigorous, on-demand lectures you can stream to your device. Joining Counselor CPD will expand your skill set to create a more specialised, highly rewarding practice. For more information on the Counselor CPD Library, visit counsellingtutor.com.
Thank you for listening to the Counselling Tutor Podcast. Find the show notes for this episode on our website at www.counsellingtutor.com.